Australia has a long and complex history with organized crime. From the early days of European settlement, the country has been home to groups of criminals who have sought to operate outside the law. The vast distances, harsh conditions, and often lawless nature of the early colonies provided fertile ground for criminal enterprises to flourish. This essay will explore the evolution of organized crime in Australia from the bushrangers of the 19th century to the sophisticated crime syndicates of the 21st century. No exploration of Australian organized crime would be complete without mentioning the bushrangers. These notorious figures have left an indelible mark on the country's history, and their stories continue to captivate the imagination of many. These outlaws who roamed the Australian bush in the 19th century have become romanticized figures in Australian folklore. Their daring escapades and rebellious nature have been the subject of countless books, films, and songs. Often portrayed as Robin Hood-esque characters, stealing from the rich and corrupt, the reality of the bushrangers was far more complex. While some may have had noble intentions, many were driven by less honorable motives.
Some bushrangers, like Ned Kelly, were driven by a sense of injustice and fought against what they saw as an oppressive system. Kelly's story is one of defiance and resistance, and he has become a symbol of the struggle against tyranny. Kelly, perhaps the most famous of all bushrangers, became a folk hero to many for his defiance of authority. His homemade armor and dramatic last stand have become legendary, cementing his place in Australian history. However, Kelly and his gang were also responsible for numerous robberies and murders. Their actions, while sometimes seen as acts of rebellion, often had violent and tragic consequences.
Other bushrangers were simply ruthless criminals, motivated by greed and a desire for personal gain. They had no qualms about using violence to achieve their ends, and their reign of terror left a trail of destruction in their wake. They terrorized rural communities, robbing banks, businesses, and individuals. The fear they instilled in the hearts of settlers was palpable, and their presence was a constant threat to the peace and stability of the region. Their exploits often captured the public imagination, but their actions had a devastating impact on the lives of their victims. Families were torn apart, livelihoods were destroyed, and the sense of security in rural areas was shattered. The bushranger era eventually came to an end as law enforcement became more organized and effective. The relentless pursuit by the police and the establishment of a more structured legal system made it increasingly difficult for bushrangers to operate. However, the legend of the bushranger lived on, becoming a symbol of both rebellion against authority and the dark underbelly of Australian society. Their stories continue to be told and retold, each time adding new layers to their mythos. The bushrangers, though romanticized, were a product of their time. They emerged from a period of great social and economic upheaval, where the lines between right and wrong were often blurred. They reflected the lawlessness and social upheaval of early Australia. The harsh conditions of the Australian frontier, combined with the lack of a strong legal framework, created an environment where bushrangers could thrive. Their story, though often told with a sense of adventure, is a reminder of the dark side of the country's past and the enduring allure of organized crime. The bushrangers' legacy is a complex one, filled with tales of bravery, brutality, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. As Australia urbanized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, organized crime followed the population shift. The rapid growth of cities brought with it not only opportunities for legitimate businesses, but also fertile ground for criminal enterprises to take root and flourish. Cities like Sydney and Melbourne became breeding grounds for new forms of criminal enterprise. The bustling streets, filled with people from all walks of life, provided the perfect cover for illicit activities to thrive unnoticed by the general populace. Out of this urban sprawl emerged the razor gangs, notorious for their use of cutthroat razors in violent turf wars. These gangs were not just a product of their environment, but also a reflection of the harsh realities and struggles faced by many during this period.
The razor gangs, often composed of former soldiers hardened by the trenches of World War I, fought for control of gambling dens, prostitution rings, and other illicit businesses. These men, having experienced the brutality of war, brought their combat skills and hardened mentalities back to the streets of Australia. These gangs were brutal and ruthless, their violence shocking even in the rough-and-tumble world of the criminal underworld. Street brawls and violent confrontations became a common sight, leaving a trail of blood and fear in their wake.
One of the most notorious figures of this era was Tilly Devine, a brothel madam who ruled Sydney's red light district with an iron fist. Devine's influence extended far beyond her brothels, as she became a key player in the city's criminal underworld. Devine, a woman in a man's world, used cunning and ruthlessness to build her empire, amassing wealth and power through prostitution, extortion, and sly grog selling. Her ability to navigate the male-dominated criminal landscape made her a formidable and feared figure.
Another prominent figure was Abe Saffron, known as Mr. Sin, who controlled a vast network of illegal gambling dens and brothels. Saffron's operations were meticulously organized, and his influence reached deep into the fabric of Australian society. Saffron, a master manipulator, cultivated influence with corrupt officials and law enforcement, allowing him to operate with impunity for decades. His ability to bribe and blackmail those in power ensured that his criminal activities went largely unchecked. The razor gangs and criminal empires of this era laid the foundation for the more sophisticated crime syndicates that would emerge in the latter half of the 20th century. These early criminal organizations demonstrated the potential for organized crime to evolve and adapt to changing societal conditions. They demonstrated the profitability of organized crime and the power it could wield in a rapidly changing society. The legacy of these early criminals can still be felt today, as modern crime syndicates continue to build on the foundations laid by their predecessors, constantly finding new ways to exploit the vulnerabilities of urban life. The decades following World War II saw a significant shift in the landscape of Australian organised crime. The country, still reeling from the war's aftermath, was undergoing rapid social and economic changes. These changes created fertile ground for the evolution of criminal activities. The old order, characterized by street gangs and vice rackets, began to give way to more structured and sophisticated criminal organizations. These new entities were not just about brute force. They were about strategy, influence, and long-term planning. The street gangs of yesteryear, with their rough-and-tumble approach, were gradually overshadowed by more cunning and organized syndicates.
This period saw the emergence of powerful crime families, often with roots in post-war immigration. Many of these families came from countries with a strong tradition of organized crime, bringing with them a wealth of knowledge and experience. They saw opportunities in the burgeoning Australian economy and seized them with both hands. These families, inspired by the American mafia, sought to build their empires on drug trafficking, extortion, and infiltration of legitimate businesses. They were meticulous in their operations, often using legitimate fronts to mask their illegal activities. This not only provided them with a steady stream of income, but also made it harder for law enforcement to track them down. One of the most notorious figures of this era was Percival John Reginald Percy Galea, a Maltese Australian who headed a criminal organization involved in illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Galea's operations were vast and varied, making him a formidable force in the underworld. Galea, known for his ruthlessness and business acumen, exerted considerable influence within the underworld and beyond. His ability to navigate both the criminal and legitimate worlds made him a unique and dangerous adversary. He was not just a thug, he was a businessman with a criminal edge.
Another significant figure was Robert Trimble, a prominent figure in the Australian drug trade. Trimble's rise to power was marked by his involvement in the infamous Mr. Asia drug syndicate, which was responsible for a significant portion of the heroin trade in the region. Trimble, linked to the infamous Mr. Asia drug syndicate, controlled a vast heroin trafficking network that stretched from Asia to Australia and beyond. His operations were sophisticated, involving multiple layers of distribution and a network of loyal associates. This made it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to dismantle his empire. This era also saw the increasing involvement of outlaw motorcycle gangs in organized crime. These groups, with their paramilitary structure and culture of violence, were well suited to the demands of the criminal underworld. They brought a new level of brutality and organization to the scene. Groups like the Hells Angels, already established overseas, found fertile ground in Australia. Their paramilitary structure and culture of violence made them formidable players in the criminal underworld. They were not just about riding bikes and causing trouble, they were involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and other serious crimes. The rise of these godfathers and the increasing sophistication of criminal organizations marked a new chapter in Australian organized crime. It was a time when the lines between the legitimate and the illegitimate were increasingly blurred, and the influence of these criminal entities extended far beyond the underworld. It was a period of escalating violence, corruption, and the infiltration of legitimate businesses, forever altering the country's criminal landscape. The impact of these changes is still felt today, as modern law enforcement continues to grapple with the legacy of these powerful and sophisticated criminal organizations.